Welcome back. I'm down at the Old Maloney Road Bridge. You notice what's behind me? The limestone blocks, the crappy marble? Yeah, there's another use for it. Anyway, we're not going to talk marble. Promise. We already did a lot of that last week. Instead, I've come down to the Old Maloney Road to talk till I can't talk no more. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. What I want to talk to you about today is instead historical photography. This week, we are starting a series of activities for the next couple weeks that will try to put you to the test in using archival materials to interpret past landscapes. This week, for the first activity, this activity right here, this is going to be our chance to try to use historical photos from the ASU Historical Photography Collection to look at 3 different locations on the historical campus landscape and figure out where those locations may have been. At least what they might correspond with on the contemporary campus. There are some challenges to the project. We'll get to those in a little bit, but first I wanted to just give you a few words about historical photos and using historical photographs in landscape reconstruction. So, first of all, historical photography. If you look at the history of photography, there's experiments with photographic devices early in the 19th century in Europe. In fact, one of the first photographs of a person outside and about it was taken in Paris sometime in the 18-teens, early 1820s. By the 1830s and 1840s, photography started to gain popularity in the United States. The style of photography that was popular, however, was not the go out and about with your camera and take photos of what you see. It was portrait photography, using a type of photographic technology called the daguerreotype. And there were a couple things about the daguerreotypes that made it not possible to go out and about with your camera. First, the camera itself was huge. It was not portable, it was not mobile. Second, the time it took to get an exposure was significantly longer than cameras even 30, 40 years later in the mid to late 19th century. And that transition to faster development time and lighter cameras is significant for our purposes, thinking about historical landscape photography. So in the 1830s, 1840s, you wanted to have one of these newfangled photos taken. You'd usually go to a photographer's studio and sit much like you would have for a painter to paint your portrait. And sat, come on painter, get the Tennessee marble wall behind me in the portrait, come on. And you would have your portrait taken. If you were wealthy enough, maybe you could get a photographer to come to you at your home. All of that is to say that we don't see landscape photography until 2 things. One, the Civil War. Battlefield photography, such as by the renowned photographer Mathew Brady, spurred an interest in taking photos outdoors. Mind you, Brady's most famous photography was of the Civil War dead, lines of corpses along battlefields. But these were popular. Not only were they reprinted in major newspapers in the Northeast, Brady exhibited his photos at stand-up galleries in Baltimore and Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. Then, after the Civil War, landscape photography starts to come into its own, without the corpses, through travel. The middle class took advantage of cheap, affordable, and expanding rail systems to travel. And if you couldn't travel, don't worry, a photographer could do it for you. Could go to the Adirondack Mountains, could go to Niagara Falls, could go to the North Woods of Maine and take photos while there. And then come back to their studio in Boston or New York and exhibit those photos and charge you money to come in and see these exhibits of their travels. So it's not really until the late 19th century that we start to see landscape photography as we'd understand it today become popular in American society. Once landscape photography became popular in American society, we start to see landscape photos being translated into use in magazines and newspapers. We start to see the explosion of postcards, so that not only could you, a nice middle-class American, go and visit the largest ball of twine in the United States, somewhere on Route 66, I think. You could send a postcard of a photo that someone else already took that said, hey, here's this landscape feature. While this did give us quite a few historical photos and postcards that we can use to try to reconstruct the past landscape, despite this explosion in landscape photography in the late 19th century, if we want to use historical photographs for landscape reconstruction purposes, we're going to face some challenges. And here are some of those. First, the worst situation we can be in is if we are trying to figure out where a building was, kind of like you all might be doing in a little bit in your landscape reconstruction project. And we have only a single photo of that structure, taken from the front. That is the worst situation, because if that photo taken of the front of the building and all you can see is the front facade, you're never going to be able to tell where that photo was taken, where that building was located, from just that front photo. What we need, ideally, for landscape reconstruction purposes, if again, going with this idea of we're trying to figure out where this building was, we need a photo that shows the building, so we know what the building looked like. And we might be able to tell what that building looked like if we see it at different angles. Second, it would be very helpful if we saw a photo of that building with other buildings in the photograph. And ideally, one of those buildings in the photograph is still standing, so we could say, oh look, we're trying to figure out where, say, the Watauga Academy was, and we see I.G. Greer in the background. Oh, then we could just say, I know where I.G. Greer is. I'm going to try to figure out where the Watauga Academy was in relationship to this standing structure that I know where it is. Or we see we see a building that is no longer standing, but we know where it was. So for us, a key building that'll be helpful for you in this first activity for the week is, if you remember in the before time, we went on that campus history tour, and I told you, hey, you see this current administration building? It's our third administration building. The first administration building was in the same location as the current administration building. If you know what the first administration building looked like, then you can simply say, that building was where this third administration building is today, and if I see the Watauga Academy in this direction, to the left or to the right of that first administration building, I can guesstimate where that building may have been based on knowing that the first administration building was located where our current B.B. Doherty administration building is today, right? Single photo, front facade of a building, not helpful. Multiple photos, or a photo that shows that building and that we're interested in figuring out where it was with other buildings that we know where they were, really helpful. Also, something else to keep in mind is trying to figure out where a photographer may have been standing when he or she took a photograph. That helps us orient where we're looking and what potential direction we could be looking in. Now, there are several clues we could use to figure that out. First, thinking about scale. How big is a structure? Is it a story, 2 stories, 3 stories? So we're going to kind of count the windows. Thinking about how big that could have been and how small it may look in the photograph. And if the building looks particularly small in the photograph, how far away could the photographer have been standing? And is there any angle we can tell? Does it look like the photographer was above the photographed buildings? Or was the photographer level with those buildings? Or was the photographer looking up towards those buildings? In our case, many photos that were taken of the early ASU campus were generally taken within the first decade of the 20th century. And almost universally, photographers loved going up on the ridge behind Catherine Harper Hall and the River Street parking deck because it allowed them to look down on campus. And at the time, that ridge was pretty clear. Folks had owned the property as part of their farms, had cut it for building lumber as well as for fuel wood. How do you tell what direction you're oriented to from landscape features beyond just how big or small buildings look? Whether you are looking up at them or whether you're looking at them from an elevated position. The other thing to keep in mind is any landscape features in the foreground. So for instance, at App State, those photos taken from the ridge behind Catherine Harper Hall are usually going to show Boone Creek, or the course of River Street, what's now River Street, in between, in the foreground, before you start to see the campus buildings. In the background, you may see landscape features, ridges, hills, mountains. On App State's campus, you're likely to see Howard's Knob. But here's the problem. Howard's Knob is pretty distant. You have to go a considerable ways before Howard's Knob starts to shift its position from your perspective on campus. You can go from the east side of campus to the west side of the campus, and Howard's Knob doesn't look much changed. However, if you can see Howard's Knob in the background of the photo, it means that the photographer must have been looking kind of off to the northeast. Last point, before we talk about the activity, is that you should not get hung up on trying to make accurate measurements from historical photos. You can guesstimate. If you knew how big a building was, or how wide a building was, for instance, let's say it's a building that's still standing, you could say, oh, I know that building's about 300, 400 feet, and it looks like you could fit two of those buildings between the building that's still standing and the landscape feature I'm trying to locate. But don't worry about, oh, it needs to be so many feet away, it has to be this many feet, or it has to be so many square feet in size. You're not going to get that from historical photos. You are going to get some estimates, you're going to get some ballpark estimates, but you're not going to get precision, okay? So, for the activity. I will admit that normally this is an activity we do together as a class. We meet behind the steam plant in IG Greer, same place we met for the campus history tour. We break into groups after I give you this kind of spiel I just did about historical photos. And then groups go out and use their eyeballs to try to see, oh yeah, let's square up this photo with the current landscape, where do we think this is? And invariably, groups will come back, and the first guess they have is often not correct, and I'll kind of give them pointers and hints, and we do it that way. However, being as it is, this has become a Google Earth activity. Meaning, if you remember Google Earth and using Google Earth the other week to look at Boone Creek, if you don't, go back to that video on installing and using Google Earth. Refresh yourself about that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Google Earth, zoom into campus, using the Street View function of Google Earth. You can access the Street View function of Google Earth by zooming in all the way at a certain point, and then it'll switch to Street View if there is a Street View route nearby. The other way of switching to Street View is zooming in far enough that you can see the buildings, and then clicking over on the navigation area near the panning option, near the zoom bar, zoom in, zoom out bar, and selecting this little yellowy green icon of a human top torso, and that will send you into Street View. Now in Street View, you're going to want to try to figure out where were 3 locations, historical locations on the campus, and what contemporary landscape areas might they line up with? All of the locations I'm asking you to try to find are on the east side of campus, south of the East End dorms, west of Blowing Rock Road, Hardin Street, so that's Durham Park. That could be in Durham Park, westward to the ASU History Statue, Aspire Statue area of the east end of Sanford Mall, and north of the steam plant. So that's kind of the box that you're working with. The three locations, I'll work with the easiest to hardest. The first is, where was the Watauga Academy? We sort of talked about this a little bit, campus history tour before spring break. We certainly talked in the campus history tour before spring break about the first administration building being in the same location as the B.B. Doherty administration building. And quite a few of the photos that I include in today's activity, show that first administration building and the Watauga Academy. So you got to think about where that could be where the Watauga Academy could be in relationship to that first administration building. The second location is the ladies' badminton court. There's a building in the background. Actually, there's two photos. And in one photo, there's a building in the background that if you know what the building is, if you've seen it before, hint, hint, wink, wink, you might be able to figure out where that badminton court was. The other building is the first women's dormitory, Lovell Home. If you remember where that was, then you're set. If you don't remember where it was, you could go on the ASU Historical Photos database in Special Collections on the Special Collections website. Go to the Special Collections Library website, Special Collections website, click the left side icon or banner for Digital Collections. Once you're in the Digital Collections loading screen, click Browse or Digital Collections at the top of the screen, and then scroll through, click Next once, and you'll find the ASU Historical Photos collection. Search for Lovell Home, L-O-V-I-L-L, Home, H-O-M-E. Click the text link for the caption of a Lovell Home photo, and it'll tell you where Lovell Home was located. So there are two photographs of the ladies' badminton court. Try to figure out where that was. And then there's the annoying one, a single photograph of a stone archway that used to welcome people to campus when they drove in from Hardin Street / Blowing Rock Road, Stick Boy Bakery area. Where could that be? Where could that have been? There is a building in the background of the arch. I wonder if that building, 3 stories, brick, extruded brick lines on the first floor. I wonder if that building's still standing on campus, somewhere on that east side of campus box that I told you all of these locations were in. Maybe. So your task is to try to figure out, using Google Earth Street View and your memories of campus, and maybe even the ASU Historical Photos collection, where were these 3 buildings? Give it your best estimates. Your estimates should basically say, I think this location was near this building, or on the back side of this building, or where this parking lot currently is located, etc. So you're going to describe their location based on the contemporary campus landscape. You're not going to worry about, I think it's 325 feet east by northeast of the statue of so-and-so in Durham Park. No, we don't need to worry about that degree of precision. All right? If you have any questions about this activity, again, because this is an activity we used to do in the before time in person, and I'm, with everything this semester, I'm going, oh God, how is it going to work digitally, remotely? I hope it works. So if you have any questions, if something's not working for you, just send me an email. I'll just be sitting down here at the Old Maloney Road. See you later. Take care.